Hello and welcome to CANNAMAntv. My name is Conor McLeod. In this very informative interview, I speak with MP and SNP member Ronnie Cowan. In this interview, we discuss medical cannabis in the UK and how to increase access, inhibiting factors preventing medicinal access, the current narrative around cannabis as a plant, how to engage in fruitful cannabis dialogue with members of Parliament, real-world data, and drug consumption rooms and a contemporary approach to drug policy. Make sure to like and subscribe, and join me on Patreon, where you can help to build a stronger cannabis media platform for £3 a month. Now then, let's talk cannabis. Let's say you've obviously been very outspoken about medical cannabis since 2018. For people that are kind of coming to this that are not politically inclined, what is it like? What's going on in the political spectrum towards medical cannabis?
Wow. First and foremost, I try not to politicise it because there is, by and large, support from different people in different political parties. So it's hard to say there's a divide. In many aspects of politics, you can say this party sits on that side of the fence and this party sits on the other. With medical cannabis, we don't really have that. There are people in, I'm going to say, all political parties who support the idea of medical cannabis. Some are more vocal about it than others. That's because of the jobs they're in. But we've got good, strong cross-party support. What we really are struggling with a little bit is actually focusing that on exactly what has to be done and when it has to be done. For example, at Westminster, we've got all-party parliamentary groups, and they are what it says in the tin. All parties get together, form a group, and discuss a subject. And they exist on all sorts of topics. But we've got one on drugs policy reform, which I'm a vice chair of. And out of that grew an APPG on medical cannabis. So I'm in that as well. And then out of that is going a third one for an APPG on CBD products. And there's a danger, I feel, that we're sort of diluting the argument. Instead of it all getting behind one or two specific aims and making them happen, there's a danger that politicians are not going to make that happen. And I fear that, I say. But we are focused on trying to get more research. We're focused on trying to, in the short term, help the kids who are getting medical cannabis for epilepsy. We're trying to get them funded because they've got a medicine they're taking, some have been taking for 2 years, they know it works. There's issues with the licensing of that in this country, and there's issues with importing into this country, particularly after the EU. So I'm not saying we're not about some specific things we want to do, but there is a slight danger that the divide and rule ploy could come into play here, because there's a lot of people on the other side who absolutely do not want medical cannabis. They see cannabis as being some sort of a recreational use, something which has resulted in people stoating around town centres in a sort of almost a vegetative state. They don't understand the difference between synthetics and they don't know what spice and mambas. They haven't delved into the argument at all. Their view of cannabis is that something which some people smoke and get high on, and they've never really progressed beyond that. Even though they're quite happy to drink alcohol in whatever quantities, they've never sort of progressed to look at cannabis as being a recreational drug. And to be honest, when I'm fighting the fight for medical cannabis, I try not to go down that avenue with them at all. But what they do need is education about the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act. We got it very, I say we are, I was not an MP in 1971, but they got it very, very wrong. And they categorised cannabis pretty much as a poison. And because of that, for 50 years, we've not done the sort of level of serious medical research we should have done. And because of that, there's an ignorance about it. GPs have never been taught about cannabis. And even now, the government 2 years ago turned and said, oh, you can prescribe medical cannabis. GPs are, well, it has to be done through a pain specialist. GPs are not going to touch this because they've not been taught about it at all. Individuals on the slide will talk to me and say, well, I could do this if I would. But in general, the practice is taking, the medical practice is looked upon cannabis as a poison, and the research facilities who would do research on it have a difficulty accessing the product because who can grow it? Who's allowed to grow it? And the license have been kept very tight as well. So hopefully we're going to open that up with more people growing it under license to the Home Office, and then we can get the product into research facilities where people can start doing serious research. And on the back of that, you've then got the pharmaceutical companies who will then develop a product, but they want a marketplace. A lot of the marketplaces are very niche because they want big volumes of numbers. So you're going to get some widespread products rather than things that can be used to target specific illnesses and conditions. So there's a lot of work to be done, but the conversation has come a long, long way in the last 3 or 4 years. But when I stood up in Parliament back in whatever it was and said about cannabis, that people were literally walking out, we're not talking to that guy. I know everyone presumes because I talk about cannabis, I'm a cannabis user. I'm not. I simply see the benefit of it as a medicine, and I also don't see I compare it to alcohol when I look at it for people using it recreationally, and in actual fact, the stats probably show that it does less harm than alcohol.
Yeah, significantly so. I mean, alcohol is like, what is it, 5% of all diseases globally are caused by alcohol. Like 1 in 5 deaths every minute is caused by alcohol. The list goes on and on. Whereas cannabis, as everybody's aware, there's a non-existent. I think you'd have to have like a bale of cannabis fall on you for you to pass over from that kind of thing. So I mean, do you think the compartmentalization of like CBD and then medicinal cannabis and recreational, do you think that's a detriment to progress towards cannabis?
I think that leads to a greater ignorance of the product. I think people are scared to look at the hemp plan. I continually say to people, let's call it medical hemp, because just maybe people look at it that way and say, okay, fair enough. I also quite often say to people, I've taken heroin.
Right.
And I've taken heroin. I was in extreme pain at the time. I was past a kidney stone, and technically it was medical morphine.
Yeah.
But it's the same stuff.
Yeah.
And when I woke up in the morning, I'd passed my kidney stone. I was not in pain anymore. So I had no need to take that drug anymore. I didn't go craving it. I didn't go looking for it. People who have addictions have still got the pain after they've finished using it, and they go back to it because they're self-medicating for pain. So I'm talking to people about medicine and cannabis. I understand some people don't want to talk about recreational cannabis at all. They only want to talk about the medical aspects of it. But we've got to look at the plant. We've got to look at that hemp plant. Produces biodegradable plastics. It produces clothing without plastics in it. I have no religion whatsoever, but people who have call it God's plant. And we've got to look and see, why are we not growing this on an industrial scale? And if we can do that, and people understand that you can grow this plant, which is not about people getting high on it. That's just one tiny, it's just the bud, just the flower of it. The rest of the plant has got uses, and that would then acclimatize people to being familiar with the plant in the first place, and then we can take it on to should people use it recreationally. But at this moment in time, that's part of a longer argument.
It's interesting that actually, because it does seem to be that the recreational element of it is the focal point of people who are opposing cannabis. So it's like, well, this is going to do this, and this. And as you perfectly mentioned, they don't regard alcohol or tobacco or caffeine, even sugar, these kind of things in the same context, which does imply a level of ignorance towards the approach of recreational substance use. But also it's an inevitability of such a long-standing propaganda conversation that's been going on. But I mean, and you mentioned about hemp, which we'll be bound to talk about that, but you've actually got a great quote for it to go back to the medical element, where you say that some politicians are hiding behind medical professionals and some medical professionals are hiding behind politicians. Could you elaborate on what that is?
I remember saying that because it was on the back of a debate, or during a debate, when politicians tend to blame the medical profession. I don't like to hear them doing that. It's as if we're absolving ourselves of all responsibility. And during the debate, that same day when I said that, I remember somebody having a real go at them. And I thought, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with us absolving ourselves of responsibility. We're in a situation now where two and a bit years ago, Matt Hancock said medical cannabis will be available, and we changed or we're allowed to prescribe medical cannabis, but we just made that statement. We didn't back it up. It's easy to sit there and be very profound about those things and say, let it be written, let it be done. But how? And we never backed up the medical profession. So I can understand why the medical profession are saying, well, we don't know enough about this product to be comfortable writing prescriptions for it. And researchers saying we don't have access to it, where I'm comfortable doing that. But there's also a deal where the medical profession are sitting saying, well, we need more guidance in terms of licensing, and that has to come from the Home Office and so on and so forth. And they'll point the finger back at us. And I think it's because for 50 years we've had this product on a shelf somewhere and thought, well, we can't touch that because it's poison. And getting over that, that's why I'm saying growing the plant, physically growing the plant is such an important part of this argument, because you see the plant and you start to understand it. It's not a threatening thing at all. It's actually a very good thing, can be good for the soil it grows in. You can do lots of other wonderful things with it, which will then acclimatise people to it. But politicians have got to stop blaming the medics and somewhere in between that, there's the truth. And we need the medical profession to sit down with politicians and agree shared aims as to where we can go with it.
Yeah, it's funny that because the whole consumerist industry would be essentially increased. The sustainability of it would be immediately increased by just including hemp in their production processes, because they've got all these detrimental materials that they use as a consequence of petrochemicals and all these different things. When the reality is hemp fits perfectly into this. It's more sustainable. It's much more durable. The integrity of the products is substantially more than it's currently used. But again, that's a real frustration, because we've got this. That's. It seems like there's an attack on all sides when it comes to cannabis. You've got the industry element, the medical element, recreational element. I mean, what can be done for this? Is it just one at a time, or just increased conversation?
You have to understand that the pharmaceutical industry have got products which they've spent a lot of money developing, and they've got marketplaces they're selling them into. And while it's under license, they've been making a lot of money from it.
Yeah.
So for me to walk along and go, do you know what? I've got this stuff which will kill off 5 of your products.
Yeah.
With this one, money talks. I'm absolutely sure that in the background there's people saying we're going to slow this and slow it and slow it until we're in a position where we can grow it and we can control the marketplace and we can produce the drugs and we can sell them at our price. Absolutely. Now, I can't prove that. Somebody might sue me tomorrow for saying that.
Oh.
But in their
I'll be in your corner, Ronnie. I'll be there for you.
In their shoes, I can see them going, if you produce, and it's a case of, I know one particular case where a young boy is taking medical cannabis, and he's still having to take other products as well, maybe 1 or 2, I think it's 2. There's 5 products he had to take, which he no longer has to take. Well, that's a pharmaceutical company potentially losing 5 of their products to a marketplace. So of course they're going to go, hold on just a minute here, what's happening? Yeah. So if they see the writing on the wall, then they will want to be in control of the development of the product, which gets into a completely different argument where politicians really do kick off. And that's when people can say, well, I'll grow my own. Mm-hmm. If I can grow 6 plants, which are allowed to do legally in some states and in some countries, I'll grow my 6 plants and I'll produce my medicine, which I believe is good for my condition. Mm-hmm. And I want the voters to do that. And then politicians really lose the thread of the argument.
Yeah, it's sometimes I think I call it sometimes the approach towards increasing medical cannabis as the long con. It's like it's not just the overnight scenario. It's like they're applying strategic measures in order to increase the difficulty in getting cannabis, in order to, as you've perfectly said, by the time it comes around to like everybody's kind of exhausted their options, now we have something in place to benefit. I wonder how much, because I think GW Pharmaceuticals has the contract, I think, until next year. I wonder how much of an influence that's going to have once that expires, if any.
I've spoken with GW Pharma extensively in the past because there's ties in there between the Home Office and the CEO of British Sugar and British Sugar Grow for GW Pharma. But that's all changing. And I've always said that in this argument, in any political argument, if you've got the right person, the right place at the right time, the whole scenery just changes. Yeah. Things you've been campaigning for years, hitting you off a brick wall, and suddenly it's a wee reshuffle of cabinet. And somebody's on the post and goes, actually, I'm not averse to that. And the whole thing just changes if you get a person at the top. So we always hope there's going to be a reshuffle within the Home Office. There'll have to be a big reshuffle within the Home Office. Again, probably that same debate you quoted earlier. I said the Home Office is a place where good ideas go to die. And it absolutely is. And in terms of immigration, in terms of all sorts of things, they're a blocker to a lot of good stuff that could be happening across the United Kingdom.
Yeah. Recently, I think it was maybe this year, that we've now started producing cannabinoid medicine domestically, which is it seems like a huge step forward. But is that just going to go straight into the private sector, do you think?
Well, I don't know the stuff you're talking about. We've been products which we were importing from the Netherlands, and we're now producing them or working on producing them here in the UK, which will certainly make things easier. Currently, we're still importing Bedrock, Bedrocan from the Netherlands under license, and it seems to be like a 6-month extension every so often. Mm-hmm. That the EU stopped us bringing it. We already were bringing it in for kids who those particular medicines could seriously help. The EU leaving the EU put an end to that. And we had to go back to the Netherlands and negotiate this, which the UK government have done. But Joe Churchill was in situ at the time. Joe Churchill did a good job there. And she extended it from January to July. And then very quickly we said, this is quick enough. So as far as I know, currently the license to bring it in runs until January 2022.
Right.
So there's a ticking time bomb sitting there for those families. But in the meantime, the same companies are helping us set up a production unit in the United Kingdom so we can make it here. There seems to be, and I don't know the intricacies of this, there seems to be some difficulty in getting up to speed as quickly as we would have liked. But no one's told me there's a need to extend beyond January. So I'm expecting us to be manufacturing it in this country before then, because there's nobody's indicated there's going to be a disruption in the supply, and those children are going to go without. So either somebody should be knocking on the door to extend that import license for at least another 6 months, or somebody somewhere knows that the product will be manufactured in the UK. And that's a start, you know, that's a start. That's all we can really wish for at this stage. Well, no, I wish for a lot more, but realistically, that's what we're going to get at this stage.
Yeah, baby steps, really. But yeah, that's exciting then. Hopefully, then that there is something going on behind the scenes then. Hopefully, come January, it'll be fine. The thing that I was actually meaning was I think it's Rock Flow, I think it's called, but which is medical flower that they're producing, I think, and they started, I think, May this year. It's in Sunderland. And that's what it just seemed like. It was like, because it was kind of a big celebration to an extent of like, hey, this is good. We're now going to have I'm pretty certain it's Rock Flow, unless I'm getting the name wrong. But that's all I thought was this isn't a medicine that's going to be applicable to children with epilepsy because it's whole plant matter, and whereas they require an isolated cannabinoids or at least broad spectrum with THC CBD combination, which has obviously been in place since 2018, but there's only 3 subscriptions. And this is one of the things I think prescriptions should say. This is one of the things that kind of it's broken the precedent, really. It's set the precedent, having people on that. So I mean, how does that go down when that gets mentioned in the political sphere? When you're like, look, we have people that are already saying this. Hannah Deacon's provided a numerous amount of letters. I mean, it
just pings off their foreheads. They don't understand the words you're saying to them. Just look at you. You know, the thing being, Alex, you know, Sajid Javid was in charge of the Home Office, and that's where Alfie's prescription came from. He's now in charge of health. And we all thought, fantastic. As I said earlier, the right person, the right place. We thought, brilliant. It's all going to rock on now, and it hasn't. You know, and as you said, Hannah's been and others have been lobbying for a long time, saying, "Talk to us. Why can you not make this happen for more kids?" This idea that we can't prescribe it, we're obviously not, because there's only 3 prescriptions. But how can we write 3?
Yeah. How
can you write 1 if it's not an ethical product which you can see the benefits for? Yeah. The fact that there's 3 being produced, how can they stop at 3? Because if they stop at 3, they're saying those 3 are wrong, which they clearly aren't. So why are they stopping at 3? And it's this fear of the medical practice to push ahead and say, we will do this. At one point, doctors were saying to me, it's about our insurance. Well, there's now an insurance company that will insure you and cover you for this, as I understand it. And I don't claim to be a medically trained, so they may have other difficulties with this. But as you say, we get 3 NHS prescriptions for specific products. Why it stops at 3 is a question I've asked. And when I talk to people around it, they have not got a decent answer for that. All they say is we're doing this and we're working on this, and it's always tomorrow. Yeah? And today, kids are having hundreds of seizures. Yeah?
You actually provided a real eye-opening statistic, really, of like since 2018. Like that's been essentially slightly more than 900 days since you made the statement, but that's roughly, if we're average 30 seizures a day, that's 27,000 seizures in that period of time. That is almost incomprehensible.
That's the 30 a day. And quite often these kids will be having 100, more than 100. And I try to sort of play it down a little bit to make it more reasonable. Because if I'd gone the high number, if I said 100 a day, they could have said, oh, some kids aren't having that. So I took it 30 as a decent representative number. But as you say, when you look at that, that's what hurts me about this argument. I can talk about it and I can say, I've been talking about it for the years and we'll have more debates about it. And we talk about it a lot. But what really hurts me is to think that today in the United Kingdom, there are children having between 30 and 100 seizures more. And we've got medicine which would stop that happening. And we are not doing enough to get it into their hands today. Because as we talk about this, it's happening. Tomorrow it will happen. It will happen on Sunday. It will happen throughout this week. And we're still talking about it where we know we've got a medicine there which can help. And that's the painful part of it. When you take away the stats, you take away the politics of it, and you actually meet the families who are directly involved with this, and you meet the children. And I've met children who are still having seizures every single day, and I've met the kids who have stopped having seizures every day, and I've seen the film of them. The kids like Murray Gray, Karen Gray's son, and 2 years ago Murray was stuck in his own body type thing.
Yeah.
And now he's riding a bike and he's talking, he's going to school, he's chatting, he's just a wee boy. Yeah. Just a wee boy. You think the difference is that Karen managed to access this medicine for him. There's other families that the stupidity, just sheer blind stupidity, is denying them access.
Mm-hmm. Again, it's extremely frustrating because I've had a lot of these individuals on the channel, and I've had obviously their footage of their children fit and sent over to then include into the editing, and it's extremely disturbing. Like, it is the least enjoyable part of anything I've done with the channel, because you're watching this, and every single time it's happened with every child, it infuriates me, and it blows my mind that it's like, I think that if this was played on a widescreen projector in the House of Commons or wherever you're chatting about these kind of things, it would have a much more profound impact.
Well, I'm thinking right and saying, when Hannah took Alfie to number 10 Downing Street, and Theresa May, who I don't believe was supposed to actually be at the meeting, but she turned up and she held Alfie or talked to Alfie, stuff like that. That's when it changed. But we can't just stop and say, I've helped this one child, and we can't have every single child queuing up outside of number 10 to go and meet the current Prime Minister and say, this is a problem, what are you going to do about it? Yeah. This is this child, what are you going to do with their medical condition? And I great deal of admiration for the families who have taken their children into the public domain. I can absolutely understand why many others have not done that. But unfortunately, that's what it's taken. It's almost like emotional blackmail we have to say to people when that simply shouldn't have to happen. It doesn't happen with other illnesses, doesn't happen with other medicines.
Honestly, I think it's going to be one of those things when we look back in the future, when we look back, it'll be like the age of ignorance almost. And I think one of the things that makes me believe it's a strategic circumstance that we're dealing with is that the panel was created, and then after these things were pushed through, immediately disbanded. It was like disintegrated, this expert panel. And recently, I think it was either this year or the end of last year, I think it was this year, the Cannabis Industry Council, with I think it was Maple Tree Consultants and Macro Solicitors, created a 10 recommendations for government, and in one of those recommendations was to construct an expert panel which can guide NICE guidelines, and they have people who are medical cannabis professionals, including parents and carers and stuff like this. I mean, how much of an impact do you think that would have, just having a much more a greater understanding through NICE influence?
I think if you're going to change the system, you have to understand it, and you've got to know what procedures NICE go through and what guidelines they have to follow. And I've been quite critical of them as an organisation in the past, that they seem to draw back into themselves to justify what they're not doing. But when, as you're right, if they're truly going to represent people and they're really going to be innovative in what they do, they've got to look out with that and start thinking of things in a slightly different realm. I've had no indication that they are a body of people who are prepared to do that. The medical profession tends to be very quick to defend itself. They're very quick to sort of round the wagons and take care of themselves if there's any allegations on the go. So for them to have a body of your phrase you use, cannabis professionals, would they be seen as that by NICE, or would they be seen as some wacky group out there who want to tell us what to do? And I'm the guy with the degree, I'm the guy that's been working in medicine all his life, I'm the guy that all people respect. And sometimes you've got to strip away that and get the back in the streets with folk. And they don't strike me as an organisation who's really ready, willing, and or looking to do that.
Hopefully, if we were to apply it, maybe an authoritative title to this group, then it would maybe remove the possibility of them thinking it was some hippie fringe thing. But I think real world data, that's a huge thing now. Whereas collecting real world data to show that it's not just scientific procedures that kind of highlight the efficacy of these medicines. It's actually real world subjective experience. And frustratingly, obviously we do have Project 21, which is doing a tremendous job at collecting a lot of this data, but we already have real world data in the form of, Lisa Quarles' son, Karen Gray's you mentioned, Hannah Deacon's son. So I mean, do you think collecting the data from Project 21 and other real world data will have as much of an influence as it would ordinarily, or do you think that this is going to just have to be a political move to move this through, and real world data won't have much of an impact?
I've always said that policy should be based on evidence, which goes with your real world data argument. But they haven't really taken on, politicians have not really taken on board, and as far as I can tell, NICE have not taken on board what has happened to the kids you just mentioned. There's 2 years worth of real data there, but it wasn't. I don't know how they expect that to be gathered and analysed in such a form that they'll look at it and they'll trust it, because 2 years down the line they haven't shown any inclination to say, that we believe what we're seeing is working. They're very quickly to say, it's not a proper trial because you're not doing blind testing and stuff like this.
Yeah.
Who in the name of sanity would set up a testing system where you're going to take a child off of a medicine which has given them back their life and potentially put them into an environment where they're given a placebo? Yeah, no parent's going to do that, none whatsoever, and that's what they've been asked for in a number of cases to do. And even people who are currently using all the other products have been asked to take your kid off them, we'll test them, we'll put them into our test, which will contain medical cannabis, but your kid might be given something else.
Yeah. It's an absolutely absurd circumstance, and I really hope. I think it was this week. Germany had mentioned that they're going to push through a much more open recreational approach, which should hopefully come into play next year. Do you think that will have much of an influence on how that? I mean, Germany is relatively close, in comparison to America or Canada, which have already pushed it through. No.
These foreigners doing all these things, It's a UK feeling, Unless we can reinvent the wheel ourselves, we don't believe in the wheel. We do it with time. We'll have to do that. We'll have to see. There's things happening all over the globe in terms of pharmacy and stuff like other products being used. But no, unless we do it here, this is done our way. We're not just because some Germans or Spanish or Portuguese or that doesn't apply to us.
It's actually extremely poetic, you would say that, Ronnie, because I remember when I was speaking to Hannah, she had described the same thing, that when she went over to Holland, she got the medical professionals there, she got the information, all the data, all the relevant pieces of information that was necessary. She brought it back over here, and she did a hand gesture when she handed it to her GP or the professional involved, and they literally looked at it, and she said that, she was like, just threw it to the wine, went, yeah, but that's over there. And it's like, this is a disregarding of the education behind these people, and like it's I don't know, what do you call that? Is that bigotry? Is that what do you call that?
Conceit.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all human beings, and the medical profession, you'd think they'd understand that. Somebody from another country, same system, same organs, same. We're always same creature, same cannibalizing system.
Yeah.
But no, just because they're trying and tested it in another country, it appears to be an absolutely fantastic thing. Doesn't mean we'll pay any credence to that at all.
Yeah. So, the last thing we'll touch on before we go then, Ronnie, is that drug consumption rooms was something you've mentioned recently. Do you think this is something that's going to be able to be rolled out? And do you think if so, it'll be Scotland that will have to kind of push it forward? Because obviously they're not really getting much help from Westminster when it comes to drug policy.
Don't get me wrong. Whoever's first, whatever parliamentary kind of rolls this out first, it will be an absolutely great thing to happen. Glasgow is probably further down the road than most other towns or cities, so it's a good indication that it will be in Scotland first of all. But I'm quite convinced that once it's done in one place, other countries, other towns and cities in the United Kingdom will say, we can see the benefit of that. We want one of those. The difficulty has been getting the first one up and running. Peter Crackin has done a cracking job, because Peter basically said, fingers up to everybody. I'm just going to do it.
Yeah.
You can stop me. I'm saving lives. You can stop me. And Peter trailblazed in that. With huge respect for what he did. The Lord Advocate, previous Lord Advocate, wasn't very keen. The new Lord Advocate, wait to see what she's got to say. There's every indication she'll be less critical, hopefully more supportive. She's already talked about personal possession, not prosecuting for that. So if I was to guess, an educated guess what's going to happen, I would see the Lord Advocate being more constructive in what we can do here in Scotland. The Scottish Government want it, Glasgow City Council wants it, and that's cross-party support from Glasgow City Council. And I would suspect, and I really do hope that we get one up and running in Glasgow, properly, bona fide, recognised sooner rather than later. And I think the results of that will prove to everybody how they can benefit people, how it helps you engage with people who are using, how you start to sit down and have a relationship with people to understand why they're in the situation and how we can help them out of it, how they can control their addiction, what they see as being recovery. And when all that kicks in, then I think other people in other towns, other cities will think that's going to help us solve the problem we've got on our doorstep. And in the same way as they've been rolled out in Catalonia, Spain, Portugal, Canada. I think we'll see the same thing happening here. But it's interesting you say, because I'm just going to one point I have to make here. I had a debate, this is the 17th of January 2018 in Westminster Hall, and Douglas Ross, who's an MP, spoke against it. And Dan Poulter, who's a Conservative, spoke in favour of it. So I'm not going party political here. But Douglas Ross came and spoke against it and basically said DCRs, they encourage drug use, nothing we want. And in part of that debate, I said, look, they're not, the phrase I said was, they're not a magic wand, they're not a silver bullet, they're part of a more humane and ethical solution. And 2 weeks ago, Douglas Ross, who's an MSP, in fact, he's both, Douglas Ross, an MSP, said, we're not going to block, we're not going to hinder DCRs, but just remember, they're not a silver bullet. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I'm glad you're listening, Douglas.
Yeah.
It's taken me 3 years to get to this stage, but at least you're listening to me 3 years ago.
Yeah. That must be frustrating for you to hear that. Do you know what's kind of annoying as well? Because I think I heard that on one of the other debates that you had maybe a couple of years ago. I don't know if it was the same one. That when they said, I think it was maybe Theresa May that had mentioned that it's like, it encourages drug use. We don't want to promote it as a popular thing. And it's like, that completely disregards the socio-economic prevalence of impoverished areas, which seem to have a high consumption rate. And that's like completely disregarding it as if it's just a desirable interaction for behaviour. It's almost an ignorant approach.
Yeah, that was a standard approach. After I've said this a few times, they worked up a standard response which I knew I was going to get, and the standard response was it encourages drug use, but there was no evidence at all behind it. You get a statement, you just stick with that statement, and you say it and you say it and you say it, and you'll see it in all sorts of policy. Just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, and it drips into the psyche of people. And people who aren't familiar with the argument, are people just who feel they don't want a DCR, will then latch onto that phrase, it encourages drug use. There's no evidence behind that whatsoever, but that's the line they'll take simply because they haven't taken the time and made the effort or been inclined to engage in the conversation and look at the research.
I think one of the additional qualitative elements really that happens when it comes to consumption rooms is not only does it provide a safe environment, it reduces the chances of disease and infection and stuff like that, you're dealing with a social interaction of an individual there that cares. And I think this is something that's important. When the individual arrives, they're most likely these people don't have anybody or their life's in a state of disrepair that nobody's there to give care. So you're not only engaged with a safe environment of consumption, but you're dealing with that human interaction, which is crucial for increased mental health.
Yeah. It's the DCR I visited in Barcelona, and I went and saw the mobile units, and I went to see one, and it was on the ground floor of a hospital. And the ground floor of the hospital was like almost an A&E. People were taking their kids in there and falling and hurt their arms. Next door to it were GP clinics, and next door to it was the DCR. Mm-hmm. And the floors above was the general hospital. Yeah. It was just seen as being a medical condition which people needed help with. And across the road from it was a primary school, and up the road was a police station. Yeah. It was just part of society. You've got a problem. And they worked a lot with homeless people as well. There was a homeless unit in it where people could go in their own locker. They could store stuff in it. They go and have a shower, get a haircut. And that's a part of sitting down with somebody saying, how you doing?
Yeah.
How come you're homeless? Mm. Are you using drugs? We're using drugs which made you homeless, or being homeless, did that make you use drugs? Yeah. And you see the person, you treat the person, and at some point that person may want to move from the homeless drop-in type thing to next door into a DCR, and rather than taking their drugs away and using them elsewhere, start using them in a safe environment where naloxone's on hand and the likes. And as you say, it's that engagement where you start to say to people, well, can we help you get a home? Can we, who is somebody in your family looking for you? Is also a big one, because people sort of slip off the sight. So when you're talking to people, say, is somebody looking for you? Can we phone somebody? Yeah. Do you want us to? You know, to put you back in contact with your family? And that's what places like DCRs do. Part of it is obviously clean needles and sterile water and swabs and whatever, and so to make it so people aren't contracting diseases. And part of it's having the locks on there to ensure people aren't dying. But a huge part of it is the human interaction between human beings and treating addiction as a health issue.
Yeah, that's perfect you say that. That's what I was going to say, that you touched on it briefly, but treating it as a health issue opposed to a criminalised approach seems to be crucial, and it has benefited places like Portugal, which have seen a decline in drug-related crime. And I think, let's say when I wrote a book a couple of years ago about a case for cannabis, and one of the statistics that kind of shocked me, and it was the drug-related crime in London was over 100,000 just for the year, and in the entirety of the Netherlands, it was less than 20,000. You know, so it's like that just shows you that obviously the population, I'm sure the ratio would have to be proportionate to some extent, but that shows you that our drug policy is inefficient and it doesn't work and causes harm.
Yeah. Well, I spoke to guys in Portugal. I spoke to the chief of police in Portugal, and he said when they were proposing changing the law to decriminate, he was totally opposed to it. He said, this is going to be crazy. He said, since this happened, this is the best thing that ever happened. He said, my police officers now fight crime.
That was from the head of police in Portugal. Yeah, that's something that should be kept taken on board, you know. And I just hopefully this next year will increase the contemporary approach at drug policy generally. You know, I mean, cannabis seems to be kind of like the unicorn almost. It's kind of pushing it forward because it's the most benign of them all, obviously. There is still obviously negative effects like anything you can overconsume, but it does seem to be that it's at least bringing the context of recreational substance use to the conversation. You know, it brings it to that forefront. But yeah, Ronnie, I think we've pretty much covered everything. Would you like to say anything before we get going?
No, it's just it's a long, hard conversation, and people have been there long before me. I've sort of come along in the back of it, particularly the medical aspect of it. And we're just going to keep on talking. You've got to keep on lobbying, but you've got to keep on educating people, not lecturing to them. There's a difference, because people have got to turn on my doorstep and say, "What do you know about this?" And so I've done quite a bit of work on this. Yeah. But do your research, know who you're talking to, and then educate them. Don't, if you try and browbeat politicians in a corner, they're going to switch off and walk away from you. But first of all, if you're going to approach your MP or your MSP over and say, what are you doing to this? Just Google them first of all and see what they've said already, because they might be on your side, but they might not be. And then educate them, because most people want to do the right thing, but they have to be brought into a conversation. I work in particular areas. There are areas of politics where I do virtually nothing. So I go to other people who will be more in tune with that. We can't all be expected to be up to date with everything that's happening in every aspect of life. So if your MP or MSP says, I know nothing about this, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but just help them learn a little bit more. Yeah, well, I'd just like to thank you personally for what you do for medical cannabis and everything relating to drug policy. You know, you're doing an absolute tremendous job, and that's how I became aware of you, because you are outspoken when it comes to these things, and it's very much needed. We need more individuals like yourself who are willing to, you know, it's not even take the risk, but be more in that line of the positive approach to a humanist approach toward drug policy and health generally. So thank you very much for your time, Ronnie. This has been an absolute pleasure. It's been my pleasure. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Thanks to Ronnie for giving me his time, and thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the content. I'll see you next time.